Rome had seen tyrants before. It had seen generals who butchered their enemies, emperors who ruled with an iron fist, dictators who silenced opposition with blood and terror. But nothing could prepare Rome for Caligula. He was not just cruel. He was not just mad. He was obscene, perverted, a monster who turned the Roman palace into a carnival of lust and humiliation. For 4 years, this young emperor twisted sex, power, and violence into a grotesque theater. He slept with his sisters, he mocked the gods, he prostituted the wives of senators, and he reveled in the shame of his empire. Even today, nearly 2,000 years later, his name is whispered as a curse. Caligula, the emperor of perversion. This is his story. In the year 12 AD, a boy was born into the very heart of Roman power. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, a name that carried the weight of destiny, linking him to the legendary founder of the empire and to his own celebrated father. This was a world of marble palaces and ruthless ambition, where a single misstep could lead to a dagger in the back. For this boy, born at the apex of power, the path ahead was already slick with blood. His father was Germanicus, the golden boy of Rome. A brilliant and beloved general, he was the nephew and adopted son of the sitting emperor Tiberius. On the brutal German frontier, Germanicus had won victory after victory, avenging past Roman defeats and securing the borders of the empire. He was handsome, noble, and adored by his soldiers and the common people alike. In the hallowed halls of the Senate, whispers turned to confident declarations. Germanicus was the true heir, the man who would restore glory and honor to the title of emperor. He represented hope, a brighter future for an empire growing weary under Tiberius's dark and paranoid rule. As a small child, Gaius accompanied his father on these campaigns. A mascot for the legions, he was dressed in a miniature soldier's uniform, complete with tiny hobnailed boots, or caligae. The hardened soldiers, charmed by the sight, gave him an affectionate nickname, Caligula, Little Boots. It was a name born of love and admiration for their commander and his family. No one could imagine that this endearing moniker would one day become synonymous with terror, a name whispered in fear throughout the very empire his father fought to protect. But in Rome, popularity was a dangerous currency. The more the people loved Germanicus, the more the Emperor Tiberius saw him as a rival. In 19 AD, while on a tour of the eastern provinces, Germanicus fell suddenly and violently ill. He died in Antioch, convinced he had been poisoned. The prime suspect was Gnaeus Piso, the governor of Syria and a known confidant of Tiberius. The golden boy was dead, and the shadow of the emperor loomed over his corpse. Caligula's mother, Agrippina the Elder, was not a woman to suffer in silence. Fiercely proud and descended directly from the Emperor Augustus, she openly accused Tiberius of orchestrating her husband's murder. Her defiance was an unforgivable challenge to the emperor's authority. For her audacity, she was arrested and exiled to a barren island, where she would eventually die of starvation. The purge of Germanicus's family had just begun. Caligula's older brothers, Nero and Drusus, were next. Seen as potential claimants to the throne, they were declared enemies of the state. They were imprisoned, systematically beaten, and deliberately starved to death. The boy Caligula, now an orphan, was spared, perhaps seen as too young to be a threat. He was summoned to the island of Capri, to live in the court of the very man who had destroyed his entire family. For years, Caligula lived as a prisoner in Tiberius's decadent and paranoid island fortress. He was surrounded by death, treachery, and depravity. He learned to survive by wearing a mask of perfect obedience, hiding his hatred behind a placid smile. He watched, he listened, and he learned a terrible lesson. In the Roman world, love was a weakness, trust was fatal, and the only true power came not from affection, but from absolute terrifying fear. Ancient sources claim that even here, his cruelty began to fester. He would secretly watch tortures and executions with a chilling fascination, his empathy eroded by the trauma of his youth. The boy called Little Boots was being forged into a monster, waiting for his moment to unleash the lessons of his childhood upon an unsuspecting world. Before he was an emperor, he was a survivor. Gaius Caesar, known to history by his childhood nickname Caligula or Little Boot, spent his formative years as a virtual prisoner on the island of Capri. He was summoned there by the aging Emperor Tiberius, the very man who had systematically destroyed his family. In this sun-drenched paradise, twisted into a den of paranoia and perversion, Caligula learned a brutal lesson in survival. He mastered the art of hiding his true thoughts behind an impassive mask, observing the absolute corrupting nature of power wielded by a suspicious and cruel tyrant. It was an education that would forever scar his psyche. So when Tiberius finally died in 37 AD, Rome didn't just mourn, it rejoiced. The city erupted in a carnival of relief. The gloomy, oppressive reign was over. In this atmosphere of collective euphoria, all hopes were pinned on one young man, Caligula, the last surviving son of the beloved hero, Germanicus. At just 24 years old, he was the embodiment of a fresh start. The Senate, the people, and the army unanimously hailed him as their new leader, investing him with supreme power. The hostage of Capri was now the master of the Roman world, and for a time, he was everything they had dreamed of. His first months in power were a whirlwind of popular reforms. He abolished Tiberius's hated treason trials and burned the incriminating records in the Forum for all to see. He paid out generous bonuses to the Praetorian Guard and the citizens of Rome, sums his predecessor had withheld. He recalled political exiles, and to the delight of the masses, he staged lavish gladiatorial games and chariot races. For 7 glorious months, Rome lived in a golden dream, convinced their savior had arrived. And then, the dream curdled into a nightmare. In October of that same year, Caligula fell gravely ill. The entire empire held its breath, offering prayers and sacrifices for his recovery. Ancient sources are unclear on the cause. Some claimed it was poison, a failed assassination attempt. Others diagnosed a brain fever, perhaps a form of epilepsy or encephalitis. Whatever it was, the illness raged through him, pushing him to the brink of death. When he finally recovered, the man who emerged from the sickbed was not the golden prince they had prayed for. The sickness seemed to have burned away the mask of civility, unleashing the demons forged in Capri. What was left was a man consumed by paranoia, a sadistic tyrant who revived the treason trials with a vengeance. He became obsessed with his own divinity, demanding to be worshipped as a living god, Neos Helios, the new sun. His appetites became insatiable, for wealth, for cruelty, and for sex, which he inflicted upon the Roman elite with terrifying impunity. The Rome that had once adored him would now watch, horrified, as their emperor, their supposed savior, spiraled into one of the most infamous reigns of terror in history. The Palace of Rome, once the seat of imperial power and prestige, became something else entirely under Caligula. In an act of supreme arrogance and financial desperation, he decided to transform his own imperial residence into a high-class brothel. The hallowed halls that had once echoed with the footsteps of Augustus were systematically converted into a labyrinth of lust, with ornate beds and silk curtains installed where matters of state were once decided. The symbol of Roman authority was about to become the epicenter of its degradation. But this was no ordinary house of ill repute. The women forced to serve were not common prostitutes. They were the wives and daughters of the Roman elite, women of noble birth, snatched from their homes by the Praetorian Guard. Their forced servitude was a direct and brutal assault on the honor of Rome's most powerful families, a message that no one was safe from the emperor's grasp. And presiding over this theater of degradation was the emperor himself. Caligula took on the role of pimp with grotesque enthusiasm. He would personally stand at the palace entrance, greeting potential clients. Heralds were dispatched across the city, inviting men of all classes to come and sample the imperial wares, with the proceeds going directly into the emperor's depleted treasury. To enter his palace was to enter a nightmare of humiliation, orchestrated by the most powerful man in the world. He would parade the noble women before guests, extolling their supposed virtues and, most cruelly, their distinguished lineage, before haggling over the price of their violation. Senators, men who once commanded armies, now watched their wives and daughters sold and degraded like common chattel. The humiliation reached its zenith during his infamous banquets. These were no longer stately affairs, but carefully orchestrated spectacles of depravity. In the middle of a meal, Caligula would abruptly rise from his couch, select the wife of a distinguished guest, and disappear with her into an adjoining chamber. The husband, a senator or a general, would be forced to sit in silence, his face a mask of impotent fury, while the other guests averted their eyes in terror. Minutes later, Caligula would return, often with the woman looking disheveled and weeping. He would then rejoin the party and, in a loud voice for all to hear, provide a graphic and critical review of her performance in bed, pointing out her flaws and mocking her husband's misfortune. The room would be thick with a silence born of terror and shame. This calculated cruelty was not born of simple lust or even greed. It was a political strategy, a form of psychological warfare. By forcing the aristocracy to participate in their own debasement, by turning their wives and daughters into commodities, Caligula was systematically destroying the very foundations of their power, their honor, their dignity, and their self-respect. He was demonstrating in the most visceral way imaginable that he was not merely their emperor, he was their absolute master. Every coin collected, every family shamed, was another blow against the Senate he so despised. The palace brothel was his ultimate weapon, a monument to his tyranny, reminding every Roman that in Caligula's empire nothing was sacred, and no one was safe from the emperor's monstrous whims. Incest with Agrippina, Drusilla, and Livilla. Drusilla, equal sign favorite, treated as wife, declared her a goddess after death. Rumors of necrophilia. But Caligula's most infamous lovers were not the wives of senators. They were his own sisters. Agrippina, Julia Livilla, and most of all Drusilla. He flaunted them openly. At banquets, they sat beside him not as sisters but as queens. He boasted of bedding them. He treated Drusilla not only as his consort, but as his equal, Rome's empress in all but name. When Drusilla died suddenly in 38 AD, Caligula's grief was frantic, unhinged. He ordered a mourning period throughout the empire, as if an empress had died. He declared Drusilla a goddess, demanding the people worship her as divine. But whispers in Rome were darker still. That Caligula's love for Drusilla was not merely brotherly, that in his grief he had lain with her corpse. For a society as jaded as Rome, even this was too much. The incest was scandal enough, but necrophilia? Even hardened Romans shuddered. For Caligula, though, shame did not exist. Every taboo was there to be broken. Orgies as political theater. Caligula slept with men, women, gladiators, actors, forced senators into sexual acts, used sex to dominate and humiliate. In Caligula's Rome, sex was no longer private. It was performance. At feasts, he demanded not witty conversation, but live sex acts. He ordered men and women to couple where they sat. He paired gladiators with noble women, actors with senators' wives, while he laughed and watched. He himself slept with whomever he chose. Actors, gladiators, men, women, slaves and nobles alike. None were safe. But for Caligula, the act itself was never enough. What he craved was the spectacle, the humiliation. He forced senators to watch as their wives were degraded. He commanded men of high rank to submit to him, humiliating them before their peers. The emperor's bedchamber was not simply a place of pleasure, it was a throne of power, a place where he reminded Rome that even the proudest citizen could be reduced to a plaything. Incitatus, the horse, pampered with marble, jewels, banquets, consul rumor, whispers of perverse obsession. Of all his obsessions, one of the strangest was his horse, Incitatus. The horse lived in a marble stable, wore jeweled collars, and was fed oats mixed with gold. Caligula invited the horse to dine at banquets, served from golden bowls. He announced plans to make Incitatus a consul of Rome, a direct insult to the Senate. But whispers spread of something darker, that Caligula's love for Incitatus was not merely affection, that the emperor's appetites extended even to beasts. Whether true or not, the rumor was enough. Rome laughed bitterly, but behind the laughter was fear. For if their emperor could debase himself so, what hope was left for Rome? Sadistic pleasure in executions, enjoyed mixing sex with violence, mocked gods in sexual farces.
I wish Rome had only one neck.
For Caligula, lust and cruelty were inseparable. He delighted in watching torture. He staged executions during his feasts, so that as he pleasured himself, others screamed in agony nearby. He laughed as blood mixed with lust. He dressed as gods and goddesses, Apollo, Venus, even Jupiter, and staged obscene plays where he coupled with men and women in costume. He demanded worship as a living god, forcing Rome to bow not only to his throne but to his bed.
I wish all of Rome had only one neck so that I might strike it with a single blow.
These were not the words of a man. They were the words of a monster. Conspirators assassinate him in 41 AD. Wife and child also murdered. Senate condemns him. Memory lived on. By 41 AD, Rome had endured enough. The Praetorian Guard, once sworn to protect him, turned their blades against him. They struck in the palace, stabbing again and again until the emperor lay in his own blood. His wife was butchered. His infant daughter's skull was smashed against a wall. The Senate condemned his memory. Statues were destroyed. His name was cursed. But some stains cannot be washed away. Caligula reigned for just 4 years. Yet in that time, he burned his name into history as Rome's most perverted, most obscene, most terrifying ruler. Even today, 2 millennia later, we remember him not as a man, not as an emperor, but as a warning of what happens when lust and madness are given absolute power.